Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel Brief, where we always give you at the end of the week some of the most important things that happened during the week, and we want to make sure that you're up to date on all that's going on in the world. And so we've got a number of things to show you that this week that some of them are quite significant in that happened. So this is one of our more consequential intel briefs because it really was a lot happening. So want to bring you up to date on something that you may be just hearing about, because there's been some announcements and statements in just the last like 12 or 14 hours. And I want to bring you up on regarding a lot of drone activity that's been seen in the United States, specifically in this case, New Jersey. You may have seen some of the headlines about this, that in New Jersey here, there have been a number of unknown drones, some of them quite large size, the size of cars in some cases, and they have been repeatedly showing up over the military bases, critical infrastructure, dams, electric power generation sites, etc. A lot of things that could be attacked by someone. The problem is that so far we don't know who they are. We don't know who's doing this. None of the devices have been brought down. And by the way, this has been going on for quite some time. It's also happening in Texas in some places. A couple of months back, you may recall we mentioned a little bit of it happened here not far from where we are, at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, not far from the Capitol, the White House, and all that. So very, very close here. And at that time, it was 17 straight days. They never figured out who it was. They never brought any of them down. And look, this is a real problem. And so finally, now that it's getting a little bit more interesting, and there hasn't been a lot of information from the government, and they haven't done anything, now then some of the major news networks are starting to pick this up. And so we saw on Fox News and CNN and actually several other places, they finally said, hey, we want some on-the-record comments from some of the senior leaders of the government. Here is John Kirby and Director of Homeland Security, Secretary Mayorkas, saying some things that, frankly, shocked even me.
We haven't been able to corroborate everything. I said many of the corroborated sightings have turned out to be piloted aircraft. I didn't say all of them, and what I said was those are the ones we were able to corroborate. There's certainly ones that we have not been able to, and we don't know the answer to it.
The President-elect Donald Trump, he just called on the Biden administration for you guys to either release any information it has about these mysterious drone sightings or shoot the drones out of the sky. How do you respond to the President-elect?
Well, first of all, the statements I've made already are the principal message that I want to communicate to the American public. We haven't seen anything unusual. We know of no threat. Secondly, we have gone to Congress repeatedly asking for more authority to counter drone activity. And we have also asked for more authority to give to the state and local officials under our supervision, because it correctly notes those authorities need to be expanded.
Are you kidding me? The Director of Homeland Security, the Secretary of the Homeland Security, has the audacity, after all that I just set up and told you about before, to then tell Wolf Blitzer to calm the American people that he sees nothing unusual. One of the comments I've seen recently, someone said, yeah, of course, Mayorkas doesn't see anything unusual. He didn't see anything on the border either. And so why would he see anything in the air? A lot to that. But the bigger issue here to me is that the fact that these things are flying all over the United States, and we don't even know, or at least not being told, which is but possibly a second issue, who this is. How can it be that the United States of America, which we say is the most powerful nation on the planet, the most technologically advanced, et cetera, we pride ourselves on all that, after multiple months in these kinds of sightings all over the United States, don't know who it is, have not brought down a single one of them by any means. And listen, I'm not saying that this is an easy situation, because, you take down something in the air, it's going to fall. And you shoot a missile somewhere, then there's, as we see in the Russia-Ukraine war and all over the Middle East all the time, errant missiles can also hit the ground and cause damage. So it's not a minor issue that you have to be very, very careful about where you shoot these things down. But some of them, for example, have been over water. Some of them have been over, like directly over a military site where it can be safely taken down because there might not be anything under that particular part of it. But there's not any effort being made to do that. And it just baffles me why. Okay, at first you're caught unaware, but now when the months start rolling around and you still aren't doing anything at all, that's a big red flag. Because listen, I mean, you may recall last month, or I'm sorry, it may have been September, when a lot of this issue in the Russia-Ukraine war, when Biden gave permission to use long-range weapons, and the immediate response from Moscow, from Sergei Lavrov, was that, listen, if this escalates into a war between the United States and NATO, I'm sorry, the United States and Russia, or NATO and Russia, he said, you know, the U.S. has always been safe, and they think that anything that happened would be on the European soil. He said that is wrong. And if you need to understand that if anything happens, and he was very circumspect on what he meant, your oceans won't protect you. There will be something on your soil too. It will come to your shores. He didn't say what he meant. Everybody gets to interpret whatever that was, but it certainly could be a drone situation, and not just from him, any potential adversary of the United States, because the technology is so profuse and so far out there, and it's easy to transport. It's easy to get it there. Some of the drone strikes that have happened in Russia, for example, by the Ukraine side, some have been launched from within Russia itself. Some have been launched from outside, and Russia even has a difficult time with it. But here's the thing. The United States has had the better part of 3 years to work with this and to understand the evolving threats of new and modern war, and especially in the drone. Without question, that has been the biggest development in this war so far, and it has dramatically changed the nature of war and how it's fought and how it's defended. And you now see, and really, we'll just take like the last 2 full years, because that's where a lot of this has really started to come into its own, both the offensive and defensive capability in drone warfare. That means shooting down, the ability to shoot down drones, the ability to knock them out with electronic warfare, and then, of course, the opportunity and the potential to counter all of those things on the other side. It's this never-ending process back and forth, and you've seen them ebb and flow about success rates expanding, and then some new technology comes out, and then it shrinks, et cetera. But here's the issue. The Russians and the Ukrainians have figured out how to shoot down between 80 and 90% of everything that comes from the other side, or to knock it out with electronic warfare. Probably more is knocked out with electronic warfare than is taken down with physical means. Anything to keep the weapons or the reconnaissance drones from accomplishing their mission. And yet, the United States, we can't take down any of them on our own soil. How can it be that the Pentagon, who is charged with defending our country, not just the Homeland Security, but the Pentagon and all of our forces, what that tells me is it is almost certain that we have taken virtually no effort to prepare our forces to fight the same kind of war that Russia and Ukraine is fighting right now. Because that is the future of it. And what that should tell you is that the Pentagon is way behind the power curve here. If we can't support Langley Air Force Base right near Washington, D.C., where the President of the United States, Congress, all that is located, if we can't even do that, or in New Jersey over military bases, et cetera, then what do you think the chances are that our tactical units, should they have to fight tomorrow, since some unexpected war breaks out, and all of a sudden we have to go on the front lines and fight the same kind of fight that Russia's fighting, possibly even against Russia if things go bad there, and that's always a possibility. What do you think the chances are that we can defend ourselves? I think the chances are almost none. Well, not almost none. That's overstating it a little bit. We've been doing drones for quite a long time, and we have a lot of that, but we don't have combat experience with them. We don't have combat experience on defending against them either. And it just stands to reason. It's irrational to think that, yes, our tactical units are just as good as Russians are now, and we've been paying attention, and we have all these drone and counter drone capabilities equal to what Russia has, but we don't have any on our own soil. I mean, let that make sense. It just doesn't. But that's kind of where we are, and that's one of the things that I'm really concerned about, especially when you have, the leaders of our country making statements like these two guys are, months after this stuff is happening all over the place. How can it be that they don't have any plan to do anything at all? And I don't know. I mean, it seems a little trite and overused to say, well, we got to hope the incoming administration changes that. But I hope the incoming administration changes that and actually takes some action to defend ourselves. because what this tells me from a military perspective is that somebody is doing reconnaissance. They are testing out systems. They're saying, how far can we go with this before it's identified? What are the countermeasures being employed? What do they do in response? And is there anything prohibiting us from taking action? And if we want to take action, what do we want to hit? And how far would it take? What is the time of flight to go from the launch point to the target location? How much battery life do we, all those kinds of things. And so somebody is getting that kind of information. And in the event that war does break out between the United States and Russia, or in the future, United States and China, or the United States in Iran, any of those things happen, or anyone for that matter, it is possible that someone is already preparing to strike the homeland of the United States. And I assure you that it won't go well with the current administration, even if after they're out, if all of these things were known and self-evident, and they did nothing to stop it, and they didn't put up any positions. Listen, at the absolute minimum, what's going on in Russia by all these Russian strikes with drones was another huge barrage overnight. 100 missiles and about 200 drones just scattered in the last 36 hours, I think, all throughout Ukraine. And a great many of them were shot down, at least reportedly. Honestly, probably about half of them were shot down. Still not minor, but that means a lot of them were getting through. But the same thing in Russia. Even Ukraine has been able to launch a lot of drones, and many of them do get through. There's a big depot, an oil depot that was hit in Oriol, I believe it was, in Russia in the last day or so. And that's been happening many times over the last year and a half. Russia has a lot of defenses, but stuff still gets through. We don't have any defenses. What we should do at an absolute minimum is that the incoming Trump administration needs to put a very high, if not even top priority militarily, on defending our homeland and making sure that this new technology, that we have ways to defeat it one way or another. This should be a major, major issue on a Capitol, of course, over the White House, but over all these military bases, especially, or where we have, a lot of our intercontinental ballistic missile silos, for example. We need to have something in place to protect us because they're very vulnerable to be knocked out. We'll see how that goes. Certainly, we'll be following that. Next, the New York Times, folks, has finally caught up to the Daniel Davis deep dive, stuff that you've known for a long time. We actually had a show on this, I think last month, almost with the exact same title, The End Game in Ukraine. It says New York Times, how the war can end, come to a close next year. Interesting thing about this, though, is that even when talking about that the end game has come, and mainly the reason is they say, well, yeah, no kidding, it's personnel issue, almost like it's about men, not machines or money. They didn't quite say it like that, but they probably should have. If they had done those calculations early, they would have known this, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years ago. Whatever, they didn't. The fact that they're saying it now, it's better late than never, I suppose. But even this still has a flaw when you read through that whole article. They're talking about, what the situation is like for the Ukraine side, what the negotiating position coming in might be for the Trump administration, the defense industrial capacity of the Western NATO countries. Can they make up for the United States if Trump, literally cuts off all supply? Can they keep going, et cetera? It doesn't even look at the Russian side of the equation. And look, how can you do any kind of a war analysis and say whether something is or isn't going to win or how it might be negotiated if you don't look at both sides equally? You have to examine both sides, and that's where any kind of rational analysis leads to this conclusion. But when you still, even at this late hour, don't look at the Russian side and listen to what they say and what their objectives are, et cetera, which have almost hardly ever changed from December 2021, a few months before the war started, and all the way through, and repeated earlier this week by Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesman. They're basically the same. All the territory that we've annexed, and now where the Russian speakers are, and a no NATO declaration for what remains of Ukraine. I mean, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. Now, that's if you were doing it rationally. But there are still those in the West that can't do it rationally. And just this morning, In Newsweek, they are trying to gin up and recreate and fan those old flames that, oh my God, if Putin gets Ukraine, he's coming after us all. And so they publish, again, this is just this morning, possible World War III front lines if Russia invades Europe. And when you scroll down, they have a map. It's about a third of the way down. If you want to go look at this, you can Google it online. But you see here, they have likely and possible European front lines in the next World War. And so when you start scrolling through these, the first one you have is along Finland's 830-mile border with Russia on the NATO's northern flank. Then the next one goes to Estonia and Latvia, where there's land borders with, reckon, the Suwalki Gap, one of the more famous places that has military capacity. You see there in the middle of the screen to roll from Russia into Europe. Then the fourth one is, let's see, it's further south. Going basically further from Ukraine could add the instability, making flashpoints in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Could be another one. And then I think the last one is going all the way down in the Georgia area, where they could threaten Turkey. Okay, that's what they're saying here. And they're just wanting to, show with maps, because anytime you pull out maps, it's like, man, that's really scary. And that's all this bad stuff, and it makes it more real, and you can, see all that stuff, and gosh, they could be coming for us. A little bit of a problem with that. Let me show you a different map that we show you several times here. And this is the actual map. This is the actual battle map. That one there was hypothetical and theoretical. But let's just take a look at something. So they're talking about all these things that this Russian army is just going to go rolling across Europe. Okay, let's look first of all at this battle here. Look at some timelines. So this is the Kursk offensive. This red line right here is the border. And this is where Ukraine troops are to this day. And as I've been showing you, these things, it used to be way out here and over here. And Russia's been methodically just squeezing this kind of like an anaconda. But folks, it's been 4 months since this first thing happened. And Russia still just keeps on, and allegedly reported in the Western media anyway. I don't know how true this is, but they claim that 50,000 Russian troops have been trying to squeeze this gap, and they still haven't gotten, but maybe it's now half of what it was, maybe a little bit less, but still a significant area there. They haven't been able to take that yet, no matter what they've wanted to do. This area here north of Kharkov, you see that's been there for the better part of this year. They squeezed this out, and then it's just been kind of a static front line ever since. In the Kupiansk area, early this year, there was lots of talk about an offensive that was going on there, and it could take the city of Kupiansk, and yet to this day, that are basically on the outskirts of it. Then, even though the percentages have been increasing, and I've talked to you a lot about recently about the Pokrovsk area, and they're actually making some real progress in this area to take Pokrovsk. But it's been many, many months since they've been eking up to this thing. And you remember, here's Avdiivka in the rear area here. And it took 9 months, I believe it was, for them to take Avdiivka. And then since that time, there's been just this amount right here. And you look, let me just give you the scale here. It's going to be hard. Just within Ukraine, you can barely even measure that from here. You can't even hardly see it. And that map that we showed you a minute ago is the Europe. And that, Russia's going to come in from the south, or it's going to come in from the north and up here, or up in the area around, some of these other Nordic countries, et cetera. And yet you see that all along here, Russia's, and now 3 years of war, this is all they've been able to get. What basis then would any rational person think that first of all, how much longer would it take for Russia to take all of this? Now, the one way it could happen rapidly from what it is if the Ukraine army finally buckles and breaks, and then the Russians can literally drive across the country. That's one thing. That's one possibility. But that hasn't happened yet. I projected earlier that it might happen this past summer, but it didn't. They've continued to hang on. But the casualty rates are eventually going to be unsustainable on the Ukraine side, because Russia just has millions more, which they can throw into this battle if need be. But you see that with all that Russia has, and they're now somewhere around 1.5 million, they still have not taken materially more than they have, in large chunks, since the 2022, when we first got the majority of this stuff right here. So then what basis does anybody think that Russia has any capacity whatsoever to take anything in Europe? There isn't any. There's simply not any, and people need to wake up and recognize that and realize that you're just being played, folks. There's just no nicer way to put it. There is an element that wants this war to continue on, and they want you to continue to support it, even though there is no rational reason to do so, because there is, as the New York Times finally concluded, it's the end game. But these people don't want it to be the end game. They want it to be the continuous game. They want it to be the next forever war for reasons which I won't speculate upon. There's probably 100 different reasons why, but they are there, and they want it to continue on. As a matter of fact, one of the manifestations of that was in one of our shows this week with Patrick Henningsen, when he's talking about what is going on with the current administration. What are they trying to accomplish by flooding the zone at the very end with billions of dollars of additional weaponry?
This is a tactical move. It's not strategic. In the broad sense, the whole Ukraine project is on a kind of arc of failure. And what's dangerous is if you have a U.S. administration doing short-term tactical moves that have a lot of political motivation behind them, the battle of how foreign policy is going to be shaped in the next administration. This is very dangerous. What you don't want to do is allow short-term political concerns to shape your foreign policy and get you into a situation that the next administration will have to repair. This is absolute blatant sabotage by a lame duck Biden administration or a deep state that is directing this or trying to set the table for some kind of unwinnable negotiation come January. Kind of blatant at this point, actually, because this isn't the first thing that we've seen in the last month of the same type. And it's going to fail because what it's doing is giving Russia a much stronger hand globally to make its case that the United States and Kiev are only interested in escalation.
Yeah, and certainly that's the case. I mean, we see that view globally is starting to spread on, but we can do is just kind of parse what's happening and trying to put meaning behind it, is to try to understand why the administration wants to have all of this activity and send all these weapons into Ukraine. In large numbers, as much as they can get out the door, as physically as fast as they can. When the war is already over, and they know it's over. Trump won the election promising to end the war. He has been absolutely outspoken ever since then. He is now finally coming out and saying he's upset about all of this weaponry going in there, because all of it does is complicate his attempts to negotiate an end. But yet it still goes on. So the question that we just can't answer right now is what is the objective here? Is it so crass politically that they just want to possibly cause an escalation? Because it's not just sending a bunch of weapons into the zone here, but it's also firing these long-range weapons. It's also allowing that, which is a known provocation to the Russians, which they keep promising to respond to. And so far, all of their responses, and they have responded to all of them, either with this big Oreshnik missile, several weeks back, or like the last two was large numbers of conventional missiles and drones that were just still continue to devastate so much of Ukraine in their critical infrastructure, causing more and more problems. It's just going to add to the woe of trying to recover from this. So it's not doing anything good for Ukraine. In fact, it's prompting Russia to do more against Ukraine. So they're being harmed by this. And I don't know if that the administration is hoping that Russia will do something bigger and more splashy against the West or something like that in order to draw the war to explode where Trump can't negotiate an end. We just can speculate on those things. I don't know. All I can tell you is that what we do see, what they're physically doing, is irrational, and it won't help Ukraine, and it won't help the negotiated end at the end. All it's going to do is raise the cost of loss. That's just a fact. Next, we actually had a new guest this week, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we had him. A retired British Commodore Steve Jeremy is looking at this issue with the long-range weapons in a kind of a new way. He had a very interesting framing on this, which I found fascinating. He compares the use of these long-range weapons to the end of the World War II, where Germany was using V-2 rockets. Someone in the Biden administration has believed that flooding the zone with several billion more dollars before they get out of office is going to do something on the ground to Russia. Do you think that's actually going to happen?
No, I don't. I mean, I think it's. I mean, as military men, I mean, I look at the use of Western missiles deep into Russia, a bit like the Germans using V1 and V2 rockets against Britain in the Second World War. it was never going to make a difference to what was going on the ground. And it's the same with this. I mean, I think in the financial world, they have an expression called risk-free reward. You invest something and hopefully there's no risk, but you get lots of money back. We seem to be doing the opposite here, which is reward-free risk. But that we know that these missiles will make no significant difference at all. And yet we seem to be doing it, notwithstanding the escalatory dangers that we're running into with the use of these weapons. So it concerns me. I'm not quite so concerned as I was, but at the time when I heard that we were authorizing them, it really was one of those few things that kept me up at night. But again, I can't see any benefit. I think there's also an interesting thing, which is that I think what most people haven't realized is that actually we are being outproduced, and that we've got in Russia, although people talk about it as a small country in terms of GDP, industrially, it's outproducing the whole of the US and Europe put together. In the Second World War, Britain had mobilized very quickly, and America was the great energy superpower and the great industrial superpower, and Britain wasn't bad either. And of course, so too was Russia. So although people talk about a victory for democracy and these sorts of things, in truth, it was a victory with countries that were able to outproduce Germany and Japan and Italy. Germany, the German army was an extraordinary thing in many ways, and the techniques they used, and they're very, very difficult to defeat one man on man in the Second World War. But actually with the capabilities that we were able to deliver, especially with America, but also with Russia, it was always going to be a German loss, always. And it seems to me that you've got a big country and a small country, and with us providing little bits and pieces, we're not going to make the difference.
And that really sizes it up right there. I mean, he just laid it out. If you're not familiar, the German V2 rockets were a technological marvel at the time, and were breakthrough technology. But it still wasn't quite that good in terms of targeting, and it was definitely a terror weapon because it was striking all across London. But it didn't have any material effect on the war. And even though Germany tried to continue fire them, it was causing a lot of damage and it was making people upset, but it didn't change into the outcome of the actual war. This is a similar situation. And I've said several times, and it's now been again graphically depicted before our face. You had the Russian side in the last 48 hours fire 100 missiles. I think it was actually 93 and 200 drones all across Ukraine. And a majority of them were reportedly shot down, but a whole bunch got through. And yet, did the war come to an end? The last round of ATACMS that hit this Russian airbase, a single Russian airbase, was six missiles, most of which got shot down. Apparently, there were two separate target sets, one to an oil field, apparently, that did cause damage and cause a fire. It didn't destroy the oil facility. It just caused damage in part of it, and that's going to limit that particular location's ability to get fuel into the war effort or into its economy. The other one apparently only hit some cars by falling debris in the parking lot. Didn't have any military impact at all. And that's just a handful of them. So you see, it's not going to. So anyone that keeps telling you that are famous people or retired generals that this is something that can make a difference, they're either lying to you or they're incredibly incapable and they don't know what they're talking about. But either way, the facts on the ground validate that they are wrong. Take that for what it's worth. Next, we want to look to the other really big issue that happened during the week, and that is that Bashar al-Assad has fallen after 13 years of civil war and seemingly having won it in 2020 and been kind of on a status quo since then. All of a sudden, this lightning advance from the north of the Idlib province, where the Assad regime never had control. They never conquered that part of it. And an HTS group that was led by a guy who's has a $10 million bounty on his head by the United States for being a terrorist, used to fight against the United States, used to be Al-Qaeda associated, ISIS associated. Now he's allegedly changed his stripes and become something different. But in any case, whatever he was and whatever is going to happen next, Assad is gone. And so we brought Ambassador Chaz Freeman on to tell us some of the significance of what happened.
Both Turkey and Russia, on multiple occasions, attempted to persuade Mr. Assad to make peace with the jihadis, and he declined. He basically controlled 70% of Syrian territory, and he thought it was up to the other side to compromise, not him. Now he's gone. And I think one of the reasons he's gone is basically his patrons, Turkey and Russia, and especially Russia, gave up on him. And Iran proved powerless to help him. One of the major effects of this really seismic change in the region is that it leaves Iran naked in front of Israeli striking power. And Iran has now lost its frontline deterrent capabilities that had been supplanted by Hezbollah and Hamas. And it is now directly confronting Israel. And we know that in the days prior to this stunning development, more and more Iranians were openly advocating that Iran actually build the nuclear weapon that it has not tried to build. And I suspect those pressures are now intense because Iran needs a deterrent against Israel and the United States. And I suspect we will see it take the path of North Korea and develop its own nuclear deterrent. And that deterrent will probably be capable of striking the United States as well as Israel.
Now, one of the I guess the narratives coming out of the United States, out of Israel, and much of Western Europe is that all of these things that have happened validates Israel's use of military power. They have decimated Hamas in the Gaza Strip, though not defeated them. There still is a battle going on there. People are still dying literally every day, but it has been devastated, probably beyond reconstruction in any reasonable time frame. Hezbollah in southern Lebanon was also had their almost completely decapitated. Their entire leadership was wiped out. And now new ones are coming in. And then in the southern part of Lebanon, there was also a significant number of casualties by their troops before a ceasefire was called. The Houthis in Yemen have been severely degraded, even further than what they were. And now then they're much less frequency hitting, shipping in the Red Sea, et cetera. And then, of course, now here's Syria, one of the other big factors in the region, and this so-called axis of resistance has been utterly destroyed, and the regime now has been physically wiped out. That makes a lot of people say, well, you know what we ought to do then? We ought to just go after the head of the whole octopus or the snake, depending on who you want to be listening to, because all of these military things have worked so far. Let's finish the job. And we've shown you many times during the week, a lot of talking heads in the United States are saying exactly that. But hang on a second, because things aren't quite as bad as they appear for the Iranian side too. They're not as defenseless as what people say, though they are certainly a lot more vulnerable now than they were because of the last round of Israeli airstrikes into Iran, and then the decimation of even the nominal capability for the air defense capability that Syria could have provided to inhibit Israeli jets moving up to Iran. So that's one issue of it. But that's not the only picture for Iran. They also have gained benefactors in China and in Russia. Russia has important military relations with Iran. They need them to continue to fight with their drone warfare, continue to produce that. That's part of their ongoing war here. China, 1.5 million barrels of oil per day that they get from Iran. They want that to continue. If that just suddenly ceased overnight, if something happened to the Iranian regime and all of a sudden that stopped in a minute, that will cause significant problems for the economy of China, and they're not about to let that happen. Now, to what extent either of them is willing to go to prevent that outcome is unknown. But it would be unwise to believe that, yes, because Russia basically just threw a handful of airstrikes and then stopped and to prevent Assad from falling. So they let that happen. And so to suggest that, well, because that happened there, it'll happen here too. So let's go get them and finally finish the job. Well, let me tell you something, folks. That is a gamble. That's not a risk. It's a gamble that China and Russia would allow that to happen. BRICS is the centerpiece for China right now, and Iran is in BRICS. And they need to make sure, China and Russia especially, that they're not seen as weak vassals before the West. And if the West says, yeah, I don't care about BRICS, I don't care about a BRICS member, we're going to wipe them out, and they do, and China and Russia do nothing, then all these other countries that are trying to get to join this bloc will suddenly start gravitating back toward the West, because they'll say, okay, well, if push comes to shove, the West is still the big player here. That's a real risk. And we better not put China and Russia in a position to have to make that call. But right now, you see, and on this headline right there that Gary's showing, that Trump is weighing options to stop Iran going nuclear, including preemptive strikes. Also, the Times of Israel has said that they have reports that Israel is planning and preparing for a strike, i.e. a decision is made and they're just going through the final stages. So even though I say it's an unwise thing to put Russia and China to the test, we may be doing exactly that. And let me look at, and I've talked about this earlier this week as well. Let's look at the bigger picture here. Hamas is severely degraded. They're not destroyed. The idea behind Hamas that led to them forming in the first place not only is not gone, it's accelerated, it's expanded in time. When this current round is over and all wars eventually end, they're going to continue with their resistance. They'll retool, they'll learn lessons, and then they'll end up striking. Unless you literally kill them all, the people who survive after all of this destruction, they're going to rise up and they will want revenge. Just like Israel wants revenge when it gets hit. Every nation does. When we do. When Russia does. When China does. When they get hit, everybody wants to retaliate. If you're a weaker party, then you have to bide your time. But that's what they'll be doing. They'll be biding their time. Same with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And who knows what's going to come out of Syria, because right now that could be go in a lot of different dramatic directions. So it's unknown to what extent they will. But I can assure you that Iran, if they get hit, they're not going to be passive about this. And if you have some fantasy that taking out the Ayatollah is going to produce a Western-friendly government, that's also a roll of the dice. And there's little evidence to support that would happen. More than likely, unless you physically invade Iran, you're not going to kill the entire regime, and it's not going to fall. It's not like Syria, to where there are physical armies that have been preparing for years, and all you have to do is weaken the regime army, and then they can roll in. That doesn't exist in Iran. Those dynamics are radically different. So that outcome's not going to happen. You need to understand that. That is so different. That's not apples and oranges. That's apples and like rocks. The situations are not even close to being similar. So you're not going to get this great outcome. And folks, and just in the history of the world, I'm talking thousands of years of human history, it's very rare that you can kill your way to peaceful coexistence anywhere. Anytime you use military power successfully and you crush your enemies, it's only for a period of time. And then those who have been harmed, they rebuild, they retool, and then they end up coming back. And eventually every regime, every empire has eventually fallen. Everything that was built on blood eventually falls in blood. That's just the truth of it. And so if you want something that's going to sustain and something that's going to be enduring, you're going to have to stop using the military means, and you're going to have to start using diplomacy. And until you can get to a situation where it's a win-win, where the other side gets a right to exist, and it gets to win something, it gets something that it wants, then it has a reason not to use violence. It has a reason to say, all right, we're just going to be content with, we just want to live. If you don't even give them that possibility, then the only thing left is for violence. And especially with Iran, that's where we're at right now. I don't know what Israel's going to do. I don't know if they're actually going to launch something before January 20th. My gut tells me they will, because that is in line with what they've done up to this point in a number of different ways. They're taking advantage of every opportunity they have militarily, and to do something at the end of the Biden administration that could potentially tie the hands of the incoming administration or make it a fait accompli. It's already done before Trump gets in. I can see that there's a good chance for that. But in so doing, they risk pushing Iran into the thing that the Trump administration and the Netanyahu administration all claim has been their objective, is to prevent them from going nuclear, is to push them into going nuclear. That's the reality of it. And if we don't want that outcome, then we're going to have to make some changes. Otherwise, as Ambassador Freeman said in that last clip, that's probably what we're going to get. We'll wait and see. Well, listen, I don't want to end on quite such a sour note here, given that it is this time of year for Christmas and the possibilities of peace. The Prince of Peace was born. Hallmark Channel. As you know, sir, always has a lot of Christmas movies that they have. And as you also are aware, a lot of movies are based on what's happening in real life. They kind of mold those things in together. Well, we have something like that, as it turns out. And apparently on Christmas Eve, there's going to be a new film that's going to come out about how peace is possible if only people can get together. And these two buddies are, you know what, they're going to find a way to make peace. They don't want any more war. They just want to make some snowmen. And I'm sorry, we couldn't resist. We saw this AI generated thing here. And gosh, I would love to see this, come true more than any possibilities of the real life stuff, where it could go, decidedly worse than that. But wanted to leave you with this possibility that, boy, would it be great to have some kind of peace floating out on Christmas Day. And I guess we'll have to wait and see how that works out there. But thanks for joining us today. I hope you have a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.